The Lost Ghost Unit of 1943, the soldiers who vanished into the forest. In the winter of 1943, an entire German patrol walked into the forests of Belarus and disappeared. No bodies, no wreckage, no trace, just 23 men swallowed by the trees. What the search parties found 3 weeks later still doesn't make any sense. This isn't one of those mysterious stories where we're left guessing what happened. We have documents, we have survivor testimonies, we have reports written by officers who went looking for these men. But somehow that makes it worse, because what they found was so strange that even the official military records couldn't explain it. The winter of 1943 was brutal in Eastern Europe. The German army was stretched thin across hundreds of miles of hostile territory. Behind every tree line, resistance fighters waited. Every village could be hiding partisans, and the forests of Belarus, thick and dark and endless, had become a nightmare for occupying forces. This is the story of Reconnaissance Unit 227, 23 soldiers sent on a routine patrol who walked into those woods and stepped into something that still haunts the few records that survived the war. It started on February 9, 1943, near the village of Krasnaya Gorka in the Vitebsk region of Belarus. The temperature had dropped to minus 28 degrees Celsius. Snow was falling so thick you couldn't see 30 meters ahead. Reconnaissance Unit 227 was given simple orders: march northeast through the forest, check for partisan activity, report back in 48 hours, standard stuff. They'd done it dozens of times before. The unit was led by Oberleutnant Friedrich Hartmann, a 31-year-old officer from Dresden. He'd been on the Eastern Front for 18 months. His men were a mix of veterans and newer soldiers, but they were all experienced enough to handle a winter patrol. They had maps, they had compasses, they had supplies for 3 days. They left their base camp at 600 hours, 23 men walking in formation into the white silence of the forest. The last anyone saw of them, they were heading toward a frozen creek that marked the edge of the patrol zone. 48 hours passed, they didn't return. That wasn't unusual. Sometimes patrols got delayed by weather or had to take cover from partisan movements. Command gave them another day. 72 hours, still nothing. Now people started to worry. A unit this size doesn't just vanish. Even if they'd been ambushed by partisans, there would be signs. Gunfire heard in the distance, something. On February 13, 4 days after Unit 227 disappeared, a search operation was launched. 2 full platoons, over 60 men, retraced the patrol route. They followed the same path into the same forest. They were looking for bodies, for evidence of an ambush, for any clue about what happened. What they found instead was silence, complete silence. The search party described the forest as unnaturally quiet. No birds, no sounds of small animals moving through the undergrowth, just snow and trees and a stillness that made even hardened soldiers nervous. They found the first sign of Unit 227 about 8 kilometers from the base camp. Boot prints in the snow, lots of them. The tracks showed the unit had stopped here, probably to rest. There were impressions where men had sat down, marks where rifles had been propped against trees. But something was already wrong. The tracks didn't continue in an organized formation. Instead, they scattered. Some went north, some went east. A few seemed to loop back on themselves. There was no pattern to it, no tactical reason for the unit to split up like that. One of the search party officers, Hauptmann Ernst Vogel, wrote in his report that it looked like the men had suddenly broken formation and wandered off in different directions. Not running. The stride length in the tracks was normal. They just walked away from each other. The search teams split up to follow the different trail groups. This is where things got stranger. One group of tracks led to a small clearing about 2 kilometers north. In the middle of the clearing, they found 6 rifles, just standing upright in the snow, arranged in a perfect circle. No bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle, just 6 rifles stuck barrel down in the snow like someone had carefully placed them there. The serial numbers on the rifles matched weapons issued to Unit 227, but the men who carried them were nowhere to be found. And here's the thing that bothered the search party: the snow around the rifles was undisturbed, smooth, like no one had walked there in days. But the rifles couldn't have been there longer than 4 days, or they would have been buried by the continuous snowfall. Another set of tracks led east toward the frozen creek. The searchers followed these for 3 kilometers. The footprints were strange. They were perfectly spaced, Same distance between each step, like the men walking had been marching to a metronome. One of the soldiers in the search party later said it reminded him of sleepwalkers. These tracks ended at the creek, not at the bank, not where they would have crossed, they just stopped. Mid-stride, one moment there were clear boot prints in the snow, the next step nothing. The snow beyond was smooth and untouched all the way to the tree line on the other side. The search party spent hours looking for where the tracks continued. They walked up and down the creek bank. They checked for signs the men had walked on the ice. Nothing, it was like they'd evaporated. A third group of tracks went south. These were the most disturbing, 7 sets of boot prints walking in single file. The searchers followed them for almost 5 kilometers deep into the thickest part of the forest where the trees grew so close together that barely any snow had reached the ground. The tracks led to an old hunting shack, a small wooden structure that hadn't been used in years. The door was closed. Snow had drifted against it. When the search party forced it open, they found 5 men from Unit 227 inside. They were dead but not from violence. They were sitting, 3 on the floor with their backs against the wall, 2 on an old bench. Their eyes were open, their weapons were leaned neatly against the wall beside them. There were no wounds, no signs of carbon monoxide poisoning from a fire. The shack was freezing cold, they'd frozen to death, but here's what made no sense: they weren't huddled together for warmth. They were sitting calmly, spaced apart, like they were waiting for something. One of the bodies was Oberleutnant Hartmann, the unit commander. In his jacket pocket, searchers found his diary. The last entry was dated February 10th. One day after the patrol had left base. It was 3 sentences long. The trees are wrong here, the men hear it too, we should not have come to this place. That was it, nothing else. No explanation of what he meant, no description of what they heard or saw, just those 3 sentences. The medical officer who examined the bodies couldn't determine an exact cause of death beyond hypothermia, but he noted something odd in his report. All 5 men had expressions of what he described as calm acceptance. Not fear, not pain, they looked peaceful, like they'd decided to sit down and just let the cold take them. The search continued for 2 more weeks. The entire area was combed, every square kilometer. They found more scattered equipment, helmets, backpacks, an entire medical kit laid out neatly on a flat rock like someone had been organizing it, but only 5 bodies, 18 men were still missing. On February 28th, almost 3 weeks after Unit 227 disappeared, a local farmer reported something to the German command. His daughter had been gathering firewood at the edge of the forest and had seen men walking through the trees. Men in German uniforms, walking in a line. Silent, she said she'd called out to them but they hadn't responded. They just kept walking deeper into the forest until the trees swallowed them up. A patrol was sent to investigate. They found fresh tracks, boot prints matching the type issued to German soldiers. The tracks were recent, less than a day old. The patrol followed them for 6 kilometers. The tracks went in a straight line, didn't avoid obstacles, didn't go around thick brush or fallen logs. It was like whoever made them had walked straight through everything without caring. The tracks ended at a massive old oak tree, the kind of tree that had probably been standing for 300 years. The boot prints went right up to the trunk and stopped. The snow on all sides of the tree was smooth, undisturbed. There was nowhere the men could have gone, no climbing marks on the bark, no tracks leading away. The patrol searched the area for hours, nothing. 3 more bodies were found over the next month, scattered, kilometers apart, all in similar conditions, sitting or lying in peaceful positions, no wounds, no clear cause of death beyond exposure. None of them had tried to build fires, none had eaten their rations. It was like they'd simply stopped trying to survive. By April 1943, the official search was called off. 15 men were still missing. Presumed dead, probably killed by partisans or lost to the forest. That was the official explanation. Case closed. But that wasn't the end of the story, because in June 1944, over a year later, something impossible happened. A German supply convoy was moving through the same region. They'd stopped to rest near the village of Krasnaya Gorka, the same village where Unit 227 had started their patrol. One of the soldiers in the convoy wandered to the edge of the forest to relieve himself. He saw a man standing in the trees, just standing there, watching. The soldier called out. The man didn't respond, didn't move. The soldier got closer and realized the man was wearing a German uniform, an old one, dirty and torn, and the insignia on his collar matched Reconnaissance Unit 227. The soldier ran back to get help. When they returned with 4 other men, the figure was gone. But they found something else. A name tag lying on the ground where the man had been standing. The name read Jeffrater Hans Mueller, one of the missing 18. The convoy commander reported the incident. Military intelligence looked into it. Hans Mueller had been part of Unit 227. He'd been 22 years old when he disappeared. His body had never been found. The report was filed away. Classified, too strange to explain, too documented to ignore. Over the years, other sightings were reported. Local villagers claimed to see soldiers in old German uniforms walking through the forest, always silent, always disappearing when approached. The Belarusian resistance fighters who'd been active in the area during the war said they'd never ambushed any German patrol near Krasnaya Gorka in February 1943. They had no idea what happened to those men. After the war ended, Soviet forces occupied the region. They conducted their own investigation into the incident because the records had been captured. Soviet military intelligence interviewed local witnesses and searched the forest. Their report, declassified in the 1990s, concluded that the fate of the German reconnaissance unit remains unexplained by conventional military analysis. That's a fancy way of saying they had no idea either. In 1967, a forestry survey team working in the area found skeletal remains. 6 skeletons, all in German military uniforms that had rotted away to scraps. They were found together in a small depression in the ground, almost like a natural pit. But they weren't piled or scattered like bodies that had fallen. They were arranged, lying side by side, arms at their sides, like someone had laid them out carefully. Forensic analysis confirmed the remains had been there for over 20 years, dating them back to around 1943. The uniforms and equipment matched what Unit 227 would have carried. But here's what made investigators uncomfortable. There was no trauma to any of the skeletons. No bullet holes, no broken bones, no signs they'd died from violence or even from falling. They'd just died all at once, and someone or something had arranged their bodies. 9 men were still unaccounted for. 9 soldiers who walked into the forest in February 1943 and were never seen again. No bodies, no graves, nothing. So what actually happened to Reconnaissance Unit 227? The theories range from the rational to the ridiculous. Some historians think the unit was ambushed by partisans who were so efficient they left no evidence. But partisan attacks were brutal and loud. There would have been signs, and why would resistance fighters carefully arrange rifles in a circle or lay out bodies in neat rows? That wasn't their style. Others suggest the men succumbed to hypothermia and exposure, which caused confusion and irrational behavior. This explains some of it. Hypothermia can make people do strange things. They take off their clothes, they wander, they make bad decisions, but it doesn't explain the organized placement of equipment. It doesn't explain why their tracks just ended. It doesn't explain how 15 experienced soldiers with maps and compasses got so completely lost. There's a darker theory that involves Soviet chemical weapons testing. Belarus was behind enemy lines, but there were rumors of experimental weapons being used in remote areas. Maybe Unit 227 stumbled into a test zone. Maybe they were exposed to something that affected their minds, made them docile, made them wander, but there's no evidence of Soviet testing in that specific area. No documents, no witness accounts, just speculation. And then there are the local legends. The people who lived in that region have stories about the forest going back centuries. Stories about people who walk into certain parts of the woods and don't come back, about places where time works differently, where the trees are wrong. They say some parts of the forest are older than memory, that things happen there that don't follow normal rules. Oberleutnant Hartmann wrote in his diary, "The trees are wrong here." What did he mean? Wrong how, wrong in what way, we'll never know. He died in that hunting shack with 4 of his men, sitting calmly, waiting for nothing. The German military officially listed Unit 227 as destroyed by partisan action. Clean, simple, easy to file away. But the officers who led the search party knew better. Some of them wrote private letters after the war describing what they'd found, describing how wrong it all felt, how the forest seemed to have swallowed those men deliberately. One officer, Ernst Vogel, wrote in a letter to his brother in 1952, "We train soldiers to fight enemies they can see. We prepare them for bullets and bombs and cold. But what do you do when the enemy is the land itself? When the forest decides to keep what walks into it? Those men didn't die in battle, they were taken. I don't know how else to say it." The files on Unit 227 are scattered now. Pieces in German archives, pieces in Soviet records, pieces in private collections. No single complete account exists, but enough survives to know that something happened in those woods that no one can explain. 23 men walked in. 5 frozen bodies were found. 6 skeletons discovered decades later. 12 soldiers who might as well have turned into smoke. The forest near Krasnaya Gorka still stands. It's quiet, Locals avoid certain parts of it. They say you can still find old equipment sometimes, rusted helmets, rotted boots, pieces of the past that the forest gives back when it feels like it. And on cold February nights they say you can see figures moving between the trees, silent, walking in formation, men who are still on patrol, men who never made it home. Whether you believe in rational explanations or something stranger, one thing is certain. Something happened to Unit 227 that winter that broke the normal rules. Something that made experienced soldiers abandon their weapons, walk until their tracks disappeared, and accept death with calm faces. Something that made a veteran officer write that the trees were wrong. The forest knows what happened, but forests don't talk, they just keep their secrets buried under layers of snow and time and silence. Subscribe if you want more stories that don't have clean answers.